Um, Counterintuitive leadership essentially helps us to be successful, and it guarantees success if we're asking the right questions and we are altering our behavior in the right way. So conventional wisdom would tell you to ask the question how. In other words, we look at our organization and we look out 2 or 3 years ahead and we set a goal for ourselves and we say, how do we reach this goal? How do we become the best at what we do in this organization? Or maybe your goal isn't to necessarily be the best at what you do, but just that you have set a goal, you want to reach a particular dollar amount, you want to expand into a certain city, whatever that is, whatever that goal is. Conventional wisdom would say, ask the question how. Put the goal out there in front of yourself and say, how can we get there? The problem with asking the question how is when we align the organization to the goal becomes the God. The goal becomes the very thing that we must achieve, and in many cases, that means at all costs. So essentially, people can become expendable. If people aren't aligning with the vision, oftentimes the knee-jerk reaction is to say, we have to replace them, we got to get rid of them because the goal is where we need to be. Sometimes integrity can get compromised when it means trying to reach that goal. So when you ask the question how, essentially the goal becomes the God and the organization really exists for that goal. Now, successful wisdom asks the question why. But we need to understand why. We have to be very careful that we're not putting the why, we don't apply the why right back to the goal. So if we were to say, why does our organization exist? Then we will immediately revert back to the how. We will come right back. We say, okay, why does our organization exist? Well, we exist to be the best widget maker in the market. Well, if you apply the why to that, then you're immediately going to get back to the how. And we've already established that the how is not the most effective way to bring your team and your organization into a measure of success. So we have to ask the question why, but we have to know where to apply the why. Now, in order to fully understand that, let's just talk about 2 fictitious characters, Bob and Jill. Well, let's just say Bob and Jill own 2 different businesses that are in competition with each other. And Bob asked the question, how? He says, how do we become the best widget maker in our field? And they set the goal out ahead of themselves and they align the organization to reach that particular goal. Now, studies have shown that when you apply how to your goal, you will achieve some measure of success and some measure of lucrativeness, if that's a word, but only about 10%. And for Bob, that is no bueno. You can see that on his face. He is not happy. However, Jill, she applied the why. Jill said why. She asked the question why. Now, when you apply the why to the right place, you will achieve, studies show, 90% success. Now, if you've ever read Simon Sinek's book, Start with the Why, this is exactly what he will talk about in this book. And it is very, very beneficial to understand this. And if you have not read Simon Sinek's Start with the Why, I really would encourage you to do that. If we apply the why in the right place, your organization will achieve about a 90% success rate. But we have to understand where to apply the why. It has to be a counterintuitive why. So what does it mean to be to have a counterintuitive why? Well, if we're not careful, and we don't understand where to apply the why, as I have already established, we'll apply it to the organization. Why does the organization exist? And then, of course, we get back to the how, and that doesn't work. What we need to do is we need to understand the definition of a counterintuitive why. The definition of a counterintuitive why is a goal that puts your people above personal and professional success. Puts people above personal and organizational success. In other words, let's just go back to Jill, our fictitious character named Jill, for a moment. Here's how Jill applied the why. She didn't apply it to the organization. She didn't say, why do we exist? She set the goal. And by the way, I need you to just understand with me here that I'm not even remotely suggesting that goals for organization are not good. You must have a goal. You have to have a goal. And so here's what somebody like Jill would do. If we are going to have a counterintuitive why, then we will in fact have a goal for our organization or our team. We put a goal out there. We say, okay, this is where we want to be in a couple of years. Fine. Now we're going to put some teams of people in place in order to help the organization continue to move in that direction. But here's what somebody like Jill does. She turns around from staring at that goal, resisting the temptation to allow that goal to become her God, and she turns back into the organization, and instead of asking, why does the organization exist, she asks, why do I exist within the organization? Why am I here? Why are you as a leader in your place? Are you there to set the example and lead and cast a vision? Yes, all of that. But that's really what the majority of people do. But it is my experience in my education, in my studies, that show that if we are not leading counterintuitively, then we can have vision, we can have excitement, we can have enthusiasm, we can have charisma, we can have all of that, and it will not achieve the level of success that you really want or that you should get. So the counterintuitive why is very important. So when we take the why and we apply it to ourselves, why am I here as a leader? Why are you in your organization? Well, if you go by this definition, then the answer to that question will be, I am here to create better people within my organization. I am here to radically transform how my managers work, how my supervisors work. And when that happens, it will radically transform the followers within the organization. You want to build success? You have to turn from the goal, look inwardly, and ask yourself, why am I here? And if you can answer, I am here to create better versions of my people. In other words, to find and identify needs for changes in human behavior and begin to lead accordingly, and you'll see that that happens. Let me throw this statistic up here for you. This is a pie chart, and this pie chart says this, that every business, and I'm just kind of looking through here to see who we've got on, every business in the entire existence of the universe, of this world, only has 3 problems. Whatever challenges, whatever frustrations, whatever you have faced in your organization, every one of those obstacles, challenges, and frustrations fall under these 3 categories. Every business has 3 problems: people, process, and profit. Every problem falls under one of those 3. But I have to admit that this pie chart is a little askew, because for face value, it suggests that all 3 of these problems are equal. They are not. In fact, a study a few years ago came out from the Wall Street Journal that suggested that the people problem, or lack of leadership skills, or lack of leaders investing into leadership skills, is really the problem for almost half of all business failures. In other words, what they had done is they had identified businesses that had started, enjoyed a measure of success, and then over the course of several years had closed, and they wanted to know why. Why did those businesses fail? And they came up with these 3 percentages. 46% of those businesses failed because they failed to invest into leadership development, or for either for themselves or for their team. 11% was a lack of experience, whether the owner or whatever the case may be, or bringing in people into the organization that didn't have the experience. Only 11% of those businesses failed due to a lack of experience. And 43% was a variety of everything else. So you can take that orange or yellow or whatever color you call that, 43%, you can chop that up into a variety of things, and we're still looking at the largest culprit that is affecting organizations today is a lack of investing into leadership skills. So when we go back and look at this pie chart, people, process, and profit, what we find, and we know this, that there are more businesses that are investing into the process. How can we do our jobs better? How can we trim the fat? How can we take shortcuts and still have a quality product? How can we improve our profit? What do we need to do to increase the bottom line and decrease the expenses. This is what a lot of businesses are investing their time, energy, and money into, when the real success, the sustainable success, are businesses that say, if I invest into my people and if I can identify needs for changes in human behavior, then I will create a more sustainable, longevity, successful pattern and pathway for our organization. It's really the truest thing out there, but unfortunately, many organizations aren't investing into this. A study from McKinsey & Company, which is one of the largest consulting firms in the world, had identified this as a true problem that exists within organizations. Not only are they not investing into leadership development, but even the ones that are missing one particular element of leadership development. And I'm not going to give that to you yet. I'm going to wait until the end to tell you what that one element is. But before we get there, let's talk about the two leadership approaches. Under any organization, in any circumstance, there are only two ways that people lead. They will either lead as a personality leader or as a counterintuitive leader. That's the only two ways that people lead. They will lead from who they are innately, their personality, and oftentimes leaders will be the kind of leader that they are from their personality, and they will call it authentic. Now, I agree with authenticity, but you would have to reach out to me and ask me my definition of authentic leadership. I'm just not going to go into that right now. It's a very different definition than what the common wisdom would say. But the personality leader is a leader who leads exclusively from his or her personality. The counterintuitive leader is the leader who leads contrary to what he or she feels naturally. So let's get into the personality leaders. Now, as you all probably know, every single person is either an introvert or an extrovert. You either have an extroverted personality or you have an introverted personality. Some people are born with these kinds of behaviors. Some people have a particular event that took place in their life that caused them to either learn or develop this one or the other. But I want to go through these. There's five leadership behaviors that flow from these two personality types. But what I don't have up here is the temperaments that come from introvert and extrovert, and I'll just tell you what they are. So let's go clockwise around this, starting with the introvert. If you are an introvert and you are a what they call a phlegmatic, you can look this up if you really want to know the definitions of these four temperaments that I'm going to give you. But an introvert will either be a phlegmatic or a melancholy. If you are an introvert phlegmatic, when you confront problems, whether it's in your personal life or in your organization, you will behave as, first of all, an introverted phlegmatic. You will either behave as a transactional or a bureaucratic individual. What do these mean? A transactional phlegmatic introvert will confront problems by essentially offering reward or incentive for a problematic person to just do better. So in other words, if you're a leader, and let me just say, first of all, that it is my philosophy that every one of you are leaders. I don't care what title you hold, what position you hold in this world, there is someone somewhere looking to you for positive influence. So I just believe that everybody is a leader. So if you are an introverted phlegmatic and you are a transactional person, you are likely to confront problems by trying to bribe someone to be better. If you are better in your job, I will reward you with XYZ. That's a transactional leader. On the other hand, the bureaucratic phlegmatic introvert will be the kind of leader who confronts a problem by saying, what do the rules say? What does our policies in our organization say about this problem? If I'm going to fix this problem, I need to know what the rules are. Now, in a little bit, I'm going to talk with you about creativity, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but the reality is, if you are a bureaucratic introvert, then your behavior is the enemy of creativity. And let me just suggest that creativity is necessary for the growth of our society. We have to continue coming up with new ideas. So as an introverted phlegmatic leader who is a bureaucrat, this leader is likely not to find new solutions to old existing problems unless they bring other people in on that. They have to be able to lead counterintuitively. They have to step outside of themselves in order to try to be more creative and not get bogged down by red tape and rules. Okay, so let's move to the introverted melancholy. Introverted personality type, melancholy temperament, and out of that melancholy temperament flows what we call a laissez-faire leader. The word laissez-faire is literally French for let them be. It is a hands-off approach to problems. If you are an introverted, melancholy, laissez-faire leader, you are going to approach problems typically by saying, work it out and let me know what you come up with. Don't worry, it'll all work out in the end. That's the kind of leadership that an introverted, melancholy, laissez-faire leader will provide. And if that's who you are, then it's not a very productive leadership style, because any of these behaviors, any one of these fails to get to the heart of the real issue. And if we believe in the philosophy of leaders identifying needs for changes in human behavior, first of all, it's got to start with us. And then it has to move into the people for whom we are responsible. And if we lead from our personality types, we will stop short of getting to the heart of the issue of that individual, of really getting down and getting into the nitty-gritty of why this person is having so many problems. Okay, so let's move on to the extrovert. The extrovert is, well, we all know what an extrovert is. They are very outgoing. You can define them as never having met a stranger, so on and so forth. So the two temperaments that come out of extrovert, the first one, as we're continuing to move clockwise, is the extroverted cleric, C-H-O-L-E-R-I-C, cleric, autocrat. Now, let me just preface this leadership style by this definition. The extroverted cleric autocrat can be the most dangerous and ineffective leader there is. The extroverted cleric autocrat is the kind of leader whom we might describe as iron-fisted. Do as I say because I'm the boss. It's my way or the highway. That's the kind of leader. And every time I provide this presentation, when we're able to be face-to-face with a group of people, every time I describe the extroverted cleric autocrat, the do as I say, not as I do it because I'm the boss, I look out into the audience and I can see people looking at each other, smiling and nodding their heads, because they know leaders like this. They know that there are leaders out there who are the most dangerous and ineffective leaders. The extroverted cleric autocrat, iron-fisted, do as I say. And again, this doesn't solve problems. This doesn't get to the heart of the issue. And I mentioned creativity a little bit ago, and I'm not going to get ahead of myself, but this right here, this extroverted leadership style, this extroverted personality type, is one that also stifles creativity, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But let me finish up our personality leaders by closing out this particular section with the charismatic leader. The extroverted, sanguine, charismatic leader is what I might call the Pied Piper. If you remember the story of the Pied Piper, this was a guy that played the flute. He had such a gift. He had such a talent, and he was able to lead all the rats out of the city. This was the fable back in this story. The Pied Piper is the kind of leader who is gifted. You encounter this person and you just know this person has got style. They have got charisma. They are just the life of the party. They could sell dirt in a desert. These are usually the salespeople, but we do find them in leadership roles. Now, the problem with an extroverted, sanguine, charismatic leader is while they can get a team of people to follow them, while they may have that influence to be able to get people to get done what he or she needs to get done, the problem with that is if that leader is no longer there, that leader has failed to create other leaders because they were so dependent upon people who were gathering around them and listening to his or her ideas. Extroverted, sanguine, charismatic leaders love people to listen to their ideas. And this is not beneficial when it comes to building the cohesive teams that we need to build. So now let's talk about counterintuitive leadership. Counterintuitive leadership is everything that is not what I just said. Counterintuitive leadership has two leadership styles: transformational leadership and servant leadership. And when you apply transformational and servant leadership to your leadership style, if you recognize, if you can look back at those personality styles, those personality leadership styles, and you can say, man, I am definitely one of them, then you have taken the first step to identify a need for changes in your human behavior. And now you can move to this particular category and you can say, okay, this is where I need to be. Transformational and servant leadership will equal success for your organization almost every time. And I call it counterintuitive leadership because these two behaviors and the 7 competencies that define them, I'm going to get to them in a minute, are absolutely not natural to who we are. How do I know that? Well, it starts with the beginning of life. As you can see in this photograph, we have a woman who is with child, a woman who is expecting. She is pregnant. And if you are an individual who has gone through this, if you have children of your own, then you remember these days. Do you remember these days? I remember. We have 3 children. My youngest just turned 20 yesterday. We have 3 children. And I remember the pregnancy of all 3 of them. Now, the first one, especially, because you don't know what to expect. You have no idea what's coming, but you are in great anticipation. You paint the nursery. You get all of the decorations up, and you are in great anticipation of this little life coming in and blessing your world. And then this happens. Now, I am not picking on this little girl whatsoever, but you can clearly see that she is struggling with something. Now, here's something that we all should know if we don't know it already. That when we come into this world, we are already broken. We are selfish, we are demanding, and when we don't get our way, we throw a fit. If we want something and we don't get it, we throw a fit. Now, you don't have to teach a child to lie. I hope that you know that. Kids can develop the skill of lying all by themselves. They don't have to be taught. Now, unfortunately, there are people who come into this world, they move through their infancy, they grow through their adolescence, they get into their teen years, they move on into their young adult years, and they move into the professional world. And some of those folks have even moved into leadership positions and never altered that natural inclination to be selfish. Now, all of those leadership behaviors that I define for you that flow out of the introvert and extroverted personality styles are what I would consider selfish leadership. Because if we lead exclusively from those, we are simply leading from what feels natural, comfortable for ourselves. And that is not what leadership is. Leadership is stepping outside of ourselves for the sake of another individual. Leadership is helping our people understand that they can be better versions of themselves. Now, I want to get into the competencies of transformational and servant leadership, these two right here. I want to get into this, but I want to just show you this structure. They're all there. You can see how this works, but I love to talk about these two leadership styles and these competencies. I love to talk about these from the structure of a building. Because when we talk about a building or a house, we are talking about the very construct of every organization in this world. You have a solid foundation. And on top of that solid foundation, you build. And when you have a solid foundation, the sky is the limit. That's just true for any foundation, for any house. And in your organization, you have a foundation, you have functionality of that organization, you have doors and windows and product and all of that kind of stuff. But if you don't have a solid foundation in your organization, then the top of your organization, the top of the structure will crumble, just like a house. If you have a horrible foundation in a house, it doesn't matter how beautiful the house is above the ground, it's not going to last. Eventually, it will fall. So when we talk about building your organization, you have to have the solid foundation of servant leadership. What is servant leadership? Well, we define it by 3 competencies, or what I would call these pillars that we put in the ground. And the first one is empathy. You can see that all the way over there. And let me just explain to you that empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy is the ability to look at the problem that somebody has and say, man, you're in a bad way, and I'm here for you. If there's anything that I can do, you just know that I'm here and I will do anything for you. That's sympathy, and that's a great thing. But empathy is what really changes the motivation of people. Empathy is what changes how people function within your team. And it works like this. Every single one of us who hold a leadership position as a title have started off out on the floor, out on the field, out there somewhere. We have all started off out there, and we've been through it. We've been through the victories. We've been through the failures. We've been through the great productivity, and we have been through the lack of productivity. And we've all been fearful of losing our jobs because we have lost a step, so to speak. Now, if we are really looking to build a team and to develop success for the organization with which we partner, then here are the steps that we need to walk through. Because the reality is that, especially with the extroverted autocratic leaders, their first knee-jerk response to a lack of productivity is to say, get your act together or get out. And maybe a couple of warnings and say, look, you know, you're not as productive as you once were. I'm going to have to write you up. Those are fear tactics, and I'm not trying to abolish those. I certainly recognize that retribution and discipline and punishment plays a very important role in an organization. But if we're going to build a cohesive, loyal, committed, effective, successful team, we start here. You see, every single one of us in these positions that we hold, we've got the bumps, the bruises, the scars, the trail of blood that goes from out on the floor, out in the field, when we were once there, up to the position and the offices that we currently hold. And when you encounter a follower who's just not as productive as they used to be, what they believe is that you are not human. And I know that that's an extreme exaggeration, but I will tell you that most followers do not see their leaders as failures. Most of them. They see a leader as high and lofty and you know, whatever the case may be. If we're going to really build a team, we have to be able to come alongside a struggling worker, sit down with him or her over coffee, or sit down in the break room, or just take a break with them and just say, listen, I know what you're going through. I've been there. I've got the trail to prove it. I've got the scars. I have been there, and I just want you to know that I am not anyone special, but I happen to be in a position because I stuck through it, I stuck with it, and I got out of the slump. And I'm telling you, I know what you're thinking, I know what you're feeling, and I know what you're going to do next. But you need to know that I get your pain. And by the way, as a leader, there is no more powerful tool than sharing your story. In a sense of empathy, if your followers who are struggling with productivity can hear your story, that is inspirational. There is nothing more powerful than your story. So you've built the bridge of empathy. And by the way, when a follower knows that a leader gets their problems, there is no lengths that they won't travel with you. They will go to the ends of the earth for that leader. And by the way, I have known workers who have turned down better jobs to stay at the job that they're at because they love the fact that their leader actually cares. A very powerful tool. But your job isn't done. Once you've built that bridge of empathy, there's still a sense of accomplishment that has to happen within the mind of the struggling worker. Servant leadership carries on with what I call assuring leadership. What does that mean? Assuring leadership can often be confused with being inspirational. Now, here's what a person does when they want to inspire somebody to greatness. They will paint the picture of what tomorrow looks like. Let's just play with this for a minute. You've got a worker who's really struggling. Now, you want to be an empathetic leader, so you come up, you tell your story, you've won them over. They believe that you get them, and now all of a sudden you start to paint the picture. You say, look, tomorrow's a better day. The sun will come up tomorrow. You start painting this picture of what tomorrow holds, but that still has not convinced that worker that they have not lost a step. That still, painting a picture of what tomorrow looks like does not fix the problem of that worker, because they've lost the confidence in themselves. And you know who else they've lost confidence in? They have lost confidence in you, not in your ability to lead, but they've lost confidence in your ability to believe in them. So every day that goes by that they are not as productive as they once were, they're looking for the pink slip on their desk or in their locker or wherever the case might be. So rather than painting a picture of what tomorrow looks like, here's what assuring leadership does. It's not just inspiration. It is what I call factual inspiration. And it means this: when you are trying to develop a worker, when you are doing your absolute best to get this worker to come out of that slump and into a sense of productivity, what you do is not show them what tomorrow can look like, but remind them of what yesterday looked like. Come alongside them and say, hey, let's take a look at your resume. The thing that got you into this place in the first place. Let's look at all of the things that you have accomplished. Let's look at the things that you have done in this organization that has caused us to be who we are today. Had you not come to this organization, we wouldn't have accomplished this. We wouldn't have got through that. We wouldn't have got this award or gotten this sales contract, whatever the case may be. A great leader will take a struggling worker and remind them of who they once were. This is why a assuring leader cannot paint the picture of what tomorrow holds. That is a pipe dream. But what really works is when we can show the struggling worker how valuable they still are. And we can walk up to that leader and we can say, I want you to know that in my mind, you are still that person. Why? Because I was there. You've built the bridge of empathy. They know that you get their pain, and you have reminded them of how valuable they are. Now, the final pillar for servant leadership is what I call spiritual leadership. Now, I want you to understand that spiritual leadership is not defined by any particular religion. It is defined by 4 characteristics: emotional intelligence, integrity, accountability, and responsibility. The largest of those 3 is integrity, first of all. Because you can provide empathy, you can provide factual inspiration to be an assuring leader, but if you don't have integrity, none of this matters. You can, if you don't have accountability, in other words, if you're the kind of leader that makes a mistake and blames it on, responsibility, makes a mistake and blames it on everybody else, nobody's going to follow you. And accountability, if you're everything that you do is questionable and nobody knows, I'm not saying that you have to divulge every fine detail of the organization, but there has to be a sense of accountability. But let me talk to you about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a very big factor when it comes to servant leadership. And here is, in a nutshell, what I tell people about emotional intelligence when it comes to leadership. If you have chosen to accept the role of a leader in whatever capacity, I'm going to say this and you just need to let this soak in for a minute. You don't get the privilege of having a bad day. Let that sink in. As a leader, you don't get the privilege of having a bad day. At least not to the point where you express it. Oftentimes, there are leaders who, I don't know, maybe there was a long line at Starbucks before they came in. Maybe the neighbor's dog was barking all night long and kept them up. And they come into work and they bring that emotion, they bring that sense of frustration into the organization. Now, I'm going to tell you something, that people can sense vibes. And here's the reality of leadership. When we accept these positions of leaders, we have an entire team of people who are also having a bad day. And if you want your organization to be successful, you have to check your emotions at the door and come in and be that positive influence for the people who they themselves are having a bad day. Now, I don't know where you are on the spectrum of spirituality. I am a Christian and I like to read the Bible, and I want to give you a real quick example of one of the greatest expressions of emotional intelligence when it comes to leadership, and that is from a guy named Paul who wrote a book. He wrote several books in the New Testament, but one book in particular is called Philippians. And in this book, he writes, whatever is lovely, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is praiseworthy, meditate on these things, think on these things. Now, he wrote this to a struggling group of people. He knew what their problems were. He knew what their issues were. He knew that they were down and they were discouraged and they needed an inspirational letter from him. Now, what you might not know is when he wrote this letter, he was chained up in prison. Not the kind of prisons that we have in our society, but dungeon-type prisons of Rome, Italy, back 2,000 plus years ago. Now, if anybody had a right to have a bad day and to express it to the people that was following him, it would have been him. And many of us would justify our bad days within our organization. We come in and we just are down and we're doom and gloom. If you are a leader, accept this truth. You don't get the right to have a bad day. You have people counting on you and they need you to be inspirational. This is servant leadership. If you can master this, then there is nothing your organization can't do. There is no problem that your team will not go through with you. And once that foundation is established, then we can move on to what is called transformational leadership. Now, you need to understand transformational leadership, first of all, begins with transforming yourself. And the reason why spiritual leadership is, the reason why I call that spiritual leadership is because out of these 7 competencies, you count those 7 competencies, this is the only one that's done internally. If we don't first transform ourselves, there is nothing we can do for anybody else. And that is what transformational leadership does. Servant leadership begins with transforming how we see ourselves, how we see other people, our worldview of people's problems, how we lead them, how we care for them, how we provide for them. And then the organization begins to change. And when the organization changes, you can count on the fact that people have changed how they see you and how they see their jobs. So transformational leadership begins with decisiveness. Now, I just want to say that these 7 competencies that I'm putting out here are not just randomly chosen. I didn't just pick 7 things and say, okay, here's what I'm going to talk about. These 7 competencies are widely within the business world known as the 7 most important competencies necessary to reach a level of success for your leadership and your organization. Figure out how to work these things, and there is no obstacle you will not overcome for your organization. So decisiveness is the first competency for transformational leadership. And I like to talk about decisiveness as a double-edged sword of sorts. And it begins with what I call your PDT, your personal data threshold. Your personal data threshold simply means this: you only know what you know and you don't know anything more. Everything that you have learned up to this very moment, as you're sitting in on this seminar, everything that you have learned, everything that you have experienced, everything that you have accepted or rejected culminates to your PDT, your personal data threshold. You only know what you know and you don't know anything more. The problem with your PDT is tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, whatever the case may be, there will be decisions that you will have to make that your PDT cannot inform. In other words, maybe tomorrow, whatever your business is, whatever challenge your organization is going to face, you're going to be confronted with a decision, and you might be tempted to say, well, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the understanding, I don't have the experience, so I don't know what to do about this. Which brings me to the other edge of that double-edged sword, and it's what I call the Rush philosophy. And if you are familiar with the band Rush, because this Rush philosophy is built on the band Rush. Many years ago, they had written a song, and they had a brilliant lyric in this song. And the lyrics were these: if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. Remember that? Great line, fantastic line, wonderful challenge. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. But it begs the question, what then did you choose? If you are faced with a decision for your organization, your business, your church, your nonprofit, whatever the case might be, if you are faced with a decision and your PDT, your personal data threshold, cannot inform that decision, most people would say, let's not move on that. And then they would say, then we have chosen to avoid disaster. And I would challenge that notion by saying, I suggest that you have chosen against victory. You have chosen against success. Now, you might ask me, you might say, look, if I don't have the personal data threshold, if my PDT doesn't inform that decision, and I have chosen to not make a decision because I don't have the information, it could have been horrible. And more often than not, if you don't have these things, sometimes they just don't work out. But let me tell you a story real quickly. There was a CEO, a man who was appointed CEO of a particular organization. By the way, this is a true story. He was appointed CEO of a particular organization, and when he stepped into this organization, this business was failing miserably. They were losing money. They were bleeding money. This guy steps into the helm of CEO, and with the team of people that was his executive team, they began to make decisions. They began to take challenges and step out and do some things. And it seemed like everything this man did turned to gold. In fact, one of his colleagues came up to him one day and said, I have to know, what is it about you that everything you do is successful? And his response was this: make right decisions. And his buddy looked at him and he said, well, I get that. I understand that. But how do you know what the right decisions are? And his response was this: because I have spent years making the wrong ones. That is a powerful statement. A powerful statement. You see, there's something to be said for risk management. You want to talk to me about risk management, reach out to me. There's my website that's on the screen there. You can find my contact information. We can talk about risk management, but there are times when we have to step out and take a risk. We have to step out on faith. We have to step out and take a chance on something. Because even if you didn't have the PDT to inform that decision and it failed, guess what happened to your PDT? Now you've learned something. Now you've got valuable information. You want to know why that's so important? Because the greatest lessons in life are rarely through victory and success. The greatest lessons in life are often through adversity and failure. Some of my greatest lessons that I have learned was through the failures that I have had in my life. So don't be afraid to step out and take a chance from time to time. That's what leadership is. Now, often we need to measure those. We need to research. We need to get some decisions. But you and I both know that in a leadership context, we're not always afforded the time to research things. There are times when we have to make a decision. And these are the important moments that define true decisive leadership. Can you make a decision? Can you sleep well at night with that decision? And can you own the results of that decision without casting blame on other people? Okay, let's talk about creativity. I'm very excited about creativity. Every time I do this presentation, I can't wait to get here. I can't wait to get to this spot right here. A couple of years ago, a research article came out that said by the year 2020, and we're in it, there will be 3 things that every leader will need to master, and that will be critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity. Creativity. There has to be a sense of creativity in this world, and I think that that's driven by how fast everything in this world is changing. Everything changes so quickly. There has to be a sense of creativity that helps us to keep up with that. Here's the problem with creativity. Number one, creativity, unless I'm missing something, I can't teach you creativity. I can't teach you how to be a creative person. I can tell you steps to develop new ideas, be a thief of ideas, don't be a hermit, read, go to conferences, talk to people, look what your competition is doing, tweak it, make it your own. But here's the fascinating thing about creativity. You remember the two personality styles that we talked about, introvert and extrovert, the two personality types? Introvert and extrovert. Studies show that introverted people have a greater sense of creativity than extroverts because they're far more contemplative. They like to get away. They like to meditate more. Us extroverts, we're going all the time, and we really have to discipline ourselves to unplug, defrag, disconnect from the world, take the headphones out, turn the computer off, set the smartphone down. That's the challenge for extroverts. Introverts are naturally creative. They have a higher sense of creativity than extroverts. But guess what? Guess who dominates the leadership spectrum? Extroverts. There are more extroverts in leadership positions than there are introverts. So if creativity is one of the most important competencies for leadership in our business world today, then extroverts are in trouble. If we do not master counterintuitive leadership. Meaning, if we just hide behind our personality and say, look, I'm just being authentic. I'm just being who I am. This is who I am. I have an article on LinkedIn. Go read it. It's called Personality is a Poor Excuse for Failure. But if we decide and make this decision that we're just going to lead from our personality, we're missing one of the most important competencies that can accelerate your organization into the next level and reach that measure of success that you wanted for yourself. So counterintuitive leadership means the extroverts who dominate these leadership roles need to open up the lines of communication and resist the temptation to say, well, I only like my ideas. Because that's what extroverts do. We like our ideas. We don't like anybody else's ideas. We have to be counterintuitive. We've got to invite those introverted followers in and say, tell me what you would do in this situation. And work with that idea. And by the way, one of the temptations that extroverted leaders have is they'll delegate responsibility to somebody else and then go back and change the results to fit the way they would do it. Massive mistake. Massive mistake. Let them do it the way they do it. Let the results be what they're going to be. Those could be some great teaching moments. Don't be afraid of failure. Failure expands the PDT. Let's move to empowering. The third wall of our transformational leadership structure. Empowering is a very important competency for leadership. And let me just tell you this, that back in the personality type leadership behaviors, the introverted, melancholy, laissez-faire leader. If you're an introverted, melancholy, laissez-faire, remember that was the sort of the hands-off. Those types of leaders are often misconstrued as being the most effective, empowering leaders there are, and that's false. Because if we're going to truly empower people, then we give them responsibility to take care of things, but we also are involved in their business to help them correct the things that didn't quite work out. We empower, we give people permission to be able to accomplish tasks, but we also follow up and follow through to help them understand why something may not have worked out. But let me just tell you something about empowering leadership. Empowering leadership is allowing people to take positions, give them a responsibility, give them authority in such a way that they may become so good at what they do that they leave your organization. I was in conversation with a potential client about a year ago, and I knew early on in our conversation that I was not going to be the guy to help him in his business. And it was because he said this. As I was talking to him about empowerment, I had said, you need to create a team of people around you that you might run the risk of losing some, and they might go out and create your competition. And he says, no, I want to build an empire. I don't want my people going out and starting competitions for me. And I knew right then I could not help this guy. He was too self-absorbed, he was too into himself, and he wasn't interested in identifying needs for changes in human behavior within his own organization and creating a team of people who could work in a synergistic fashion to make their organization successful. He essentially wanted them to serve his whims. I want to give you an example with a football illustration. I'm a football guy. I'm more of an NFL guy. There are two coaches, both retired NFL coaches. One's name is Bill Walsh, and the other's name is Bill Parcells. Now, Bill Walsh, his legacy was with the San Francisco 49ers, and Bill Parcells had a legacy with quite a few teams. The New England Patriots, the New York Giants, the Dallas Cowboys. But if you were to go on to Google right now and Google Bill Walsh's coaching tree, if you're familiar with the leadership chart, flow chart, you have the leader at the top, and then down here are some people that work under him, and then down here are some people that worked under them. If you were to look at Bill Walsh's leadership flow chart, you would see that his leadership structure is huge. It's this leadership tree, we call it a leadership tree, is massive. All of these people that worked for him and went out and coached other teams and went out and coached other teams and went out and coached other teams. On the other hand, Bill Parcells, who has a fantastic legacy of winning, his coaching tree is more of a coaching bush. It's really super small. There's not a lot of people that worked for him and went out and started other teams. Not as many as Bill Walsh. But here's the difference. The people that worked for Bill Parcells, the really small coaching tree, he trained them to be champions. In fact, if you look at the names under his coaching tree, you will see some pretty well-known names of people who have won college championships. They may have left his team and gone and coach a college team. Bill Belichick, one of the most winningest coaches in our modern era. But all of these people that worked under Bill Parcells have gone off and won championships. It's because this guy wasn't so much interested in creating, and I'm not trying to knock Bill Walsh. I'm not trying to say that this is what he did, but Bill Parcells' approach was different. He decided that he was going to empower his people to the point where they would be so successful that they might go off, coach another team, be his competition, and beat him in the Super Bowl, and that's exactly what happened. This is what true leadership is about. Because here's what happens. When you are the kind of leader who creates leaders, people aren't asking about the competition. They're wanting to know where that competition came from. If you have a business and you are generating leaders out of your business, and there are people that are going off and starting businesses, they're going to say, where'd that guy come from? They're going to say, oh, he came from this one over here. Well, where did she come from? Oh, she came from this one over here. Next thing you know, people want to work for you because they know you create success in the lives of people. That is what counterintuitive leadership does. Now let's get to this last wall of our transformational leader. And this part is so special to me because I am a living, walking testimony of what this can do in the heart of a struggling worker. Visionary leadership. Now, when we talk about visionary leadership, the first thing you think of is my organization needs to have a vision statement. And I would agree. It does have to have a vision statement, but it needs to be a vision statement that describes what you do to change the world. But it's not just about a leader creating a vision statement for the organization. It's about a leader putting vision into the hearts of every single one of his or her workers. The reality is, 80% of people in this world don't trust their bosses. And almost the same percentage are people that are disgruntled in their jobs. People who just think that their job is just a mundane, everyday, go nowhere job. That was me. 1995, I was living in Northeast Ohio, and I was the press operator for a company called Molded Fiberglass. I was working press 228, which was the largest press in that facility. And we made sleeper cabs for Freightliner trucks. The left panel, the right panel, the center panel. We made all three of those, not at the same time, but at different times, obviously. And my job was to manufacture 98 parts every day. It was hot, it was smelly, it was miserable, and it was so routine. You pour the mix on the fiberglass, you pick it up, you put it in the press closes, press opens back up, they take the part out, and you repeat over and over and over again, almost 100 times a day, the same thing. Well, somewhere along the way, the engineers of the organization invented this process called in-mold coating, whereby the press would open up 3/4 of the way through the process, inject this rubberized coating onto this part, close it, and when the press finished its curing cycle, it would open up, and now this part was this black rubberized coated part. And what it did is it saved Freightliner millions of dollars a year in priming. They didn't have to prime this part. They could take this part and they could go right to paint. And it wasn't only that it saved them money in priming, but it enhanced the look of this paint. Now, because I was privileged enough to work for the organization, they flew me and a small group of people down to the Freightliner plant in, it was 1995. I can't remember if it was in North or South Carolina, one of the Carolinas. We flew down there to watch the assembly line of these Freightliner trucks. And I'm telling you what, I was in this facility and it was larger than life. I mean, imagine a facility that's housing all these big semi-tractors and they're being dragged by this chain, this conveyor belt, while people are putting parts on these trucks. Beautiful parts, yellow, blue, green, white, black. I mean, just all kinds of colors that were coming off of this assembly line. What I wanted to see is I wanted to find the parts that I made with my employee number on the inside, and I found them. I went and found the parts that I made with my number, my employee number, stamped on the inside. And it was at that moment that something changed in my mind. I reflected back in Northeast Ohio, and I'm thinking about those 98 characterless blank parts that I was producing every single day, thinking there had to be more to life than this. And now all of a sudden there was vision in my heart. Now all of a sudden I saw these big trucks that I had a part in making. And if you received a package at your house, I helped get it there. I had a new vision. I had a new purpose. Now I can't honestly say that happened to the rest of the small team that went with me, but it happened to me. And I was nobody. I was just a 25-year-old kid holding down a job to get a paycheck. And now all of a sudden I saw that my job, my role in this organization was helping move the world forward. Leader, it's your job to cast that vision into the heart of your people. You have to come up with the creative ways to help your people understand that their sales isn't just sales, their job that they're doing, whatever it is that your people do, you have got to come up with a way to help them understand that their job is changing the world. It's your job to help figure that out. This is what counterintuitive leadership looks like. This is what identifying needs for changes in human behavior. And if you can begin with yourself or with your managers or your supervisors, if you can get them to embrace these perspectives, you will be guaranteed a greater measure of success within your organization. Now, every time I provide this is the step that I was going to tell you about. I get asked all the time, well, how do we know where we land? How do we know where we are on these two leadership styles? How do I know where my strengths are? How do I know how good I am? Well, I have the ability to measure that. I developed a tool called SCAN, stands for Skills Analysis, and it measures it not only helps you identify what your personality is, the introvert and extrovert, and those 5 leadership behaviors, but it also helps you identify your philosophy on what those 7 competencies are. This tool is called SCAN, Skills Analysis, and it is a scientific research method called triangulation and qualitative research. Now, there's a lot of assessments out there in our world today, and you have to be very careful when you're looking at assessments because some of them are very vague. Some of them only deal with personality, and we have to go deeper than personality. I hope that you've understood what I'm saying is personality, leading from your personality is going to prove ineffective in the long run. We have to develop these 7 competencies. So what the SCAN assessment does, it's an online assessment. It measures your philosophy of where you land on those 7 competencies. It measures your personality and what kind of leadership behavior you have. And then post the assessment, I sit down with people on a one-on-one basis and I get some data from them, and I'm able to measure their practice. So in triangulation and qualitative research, essentially what you're doing is you're gathering data from 3 points of information. And for us, for SCAN, it's philosophy, personality, and practice. And when I can get these 3 points of data from you, then I can develop the one pathway that is unique only to you to help you become the best leader you can be. I call it IPD, Individualized Performance Development. This is not a one-size-fits-all. And a little bit ago, I told you that McKinsey and Company had come out and said that there's one thing missing from leadership development programs, and that is individualized performance. Most leadership development seminars that you're going to go to, they're going to be a one-size-fits-all. You're going to get this, you're going to get some great information. You're going to get a great PowerPoint. You're going to get a great handout. You're going to fill in the blanks. You're going to go home, back to your office, back to your employment. You're going to put those notes on the shelf, likely to never bring them out again. What SCAN does through ExecuSpec Leadership Development is it gives you something to bite into that is absolutely who you are. It's you. You look at these results and you say, man, this is me. And you can identify places where you can improve and strengths that you can capitalize. And we help with that. This is why ExecuSpec exists. We are developing successful executives by improving leadership perspectives. That is counterintuitive leadership. This is what it's all about. And if you're interested in knowing more about this, man, I want to hear from you. Give me an email. Go to my website, www.execuspec.com. There's a phone number on there. There's an email, info@execuspec.com. Reach out to me if you've got more questions about this. I want to hear from you. I want to know what your challenges are. I want to know what your philosophy of leadership is. So reach out to me. Hey, thank you for being with me today. I hope that you've gathered something great from this. I am going to upload this presentation, this recording onto YouTube. So if you want to visit this later, I'll put the link on my right here on the ExecuSpec Facebook page and my LinkedIn page. And you can catch up with us there on YouTube or right here on Facebook or on my LinkedIn page. So reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. I'd even like to know where you're from. I know there's we had 146 people say that they were going to attend, and I was looking at some of the places that you were from: Arizona, Nevada, Florida, Texas. I was really excited to see all that. So reach out to me. I want to hear from you. So have a great day. Thanks for being with me.